Hey folks, welcome back to the Future Human Project. And in today's discussion, we're going to be touching upon something I think is really important to talk about that's been on my mind a lot lately. And that is looking at what in specific holds us back collectively. I'm talking about humanity here as a whole from really truly actualizing our best lived experience. So whether we're talking spiritual awakening here, whether we're talking using tech in a way that creates the biggest win-win, thriving for all human beings and for all beings, for all of life, what is this that stops us from implementing this? This is what I want to talk about with you today. So if you're interested in understanding what the bottleneck of our collective evolution is, join me. Okay, so before we get into the main content here, I just want to take a moment and do a little bit of housekeeping with you guys just to clarify things for anyone here who might also be a follower of the Substack. So the way I have things set up right now, with Future Human Project, I will be putting out new Substacks every Monday or Tuesday, give or take. Which will be the post for the week. And that's really where the freshest, newest content I'm creating will be drop first. Okay. If you like that content, but you're also following the YouTube videos, because the videos will have a different flavor and a different vibe, and I'm going to unpack the ideas a little bit more in the videos than I do in the posts. The idea is that the YouTube video for this week will match the post from last week. So the post come out first, then the YouTube video comes out a week later. Okay, what I want to acknowledge here though is that silly me, I've already got that order a bit jumbled up and messed up. So bear with me. The coming YouTube videos will reflect the posts, but I'm about 5 posts deep over at Substack right now. And I've not done the videos in the same order and sequence. So hopefully it's not a big deal for you guys. If it is, thanks for your patience as I kind of get caught up and get the order. So the first few YouTube videos here are going to be out of order with the Substack, but the content's going to be the same. Okay, enough said for now. Let's talk about the evolutionary bottleneck that humanity is facing and what that is and what that looks like from my perspective. So, like I said in the introduction, this is something I've been thinking a lot about. And it's something that I've really dug deep into thinking about and exploring and wanting to make sure that I have like a decent handle on how to present this to you first and some good clarity around what I see as being kind of where we're hung up collectively in terms of what's possible. Okay. From my point of view, and maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, probably if you're following this, you're on a similar page to me here. I think human beings have so much untapped potential, both personally. I think there is a lot inside of human beings that we have capacity for, that we're capable of, that generally your average human being is not accessing yet, and we do not see at scale. And I think also, obviously, very obviously, actually, collectively, we are not implementing systems that are really built around human thriving and really creating the optimal life experience for all of us here on Earth. So for me, this ties into one of my core kind of ethos here, one of my core orientations, which is helping to reduce suffering in the world and helping humanity to thrive collectively. This is really what I'm here for. This is what I'm about. This is a deep driver for me. So I'm always thinking about it. And so obviously it's not just about, what are the skills, the abilities, the experiences, the techniques, the technologies that we need to thrive. It's also about what's in the way of that. What's stopping us from thriving? And from my point of view, there is let's call it a personal development bottleneck or an evolutionary bottleneck. By evolutionary, I don't mean literally in the Darwinian sense. I mean it more in the metaphoric evolution sense, in the sense of like collective growth, collective, progress sense of the term. And from that perspective, there's a very real evolutionary bottleneck that has to do with a certain level of maturation and personal development that most people do not really grow beyond. Most people do not evolve beyond. And that bottleneck, just to name it here, is power and power struggles. Okay. So I want to offer you this idea first. What's holding us back from the kind of visionary, beautiful, inspired, spiritual, awakened, thriving, healthy future that I think we all sense could be one way that things go. What's holding us back are power struggles at scale. Now, when I say at scale, I mean these are power struggles that people experience individually at a more personal level that are just kind of multiplied by 8 billion. But also, obviously, the power struggles exist at different levels here. So they also exist at a systemic level. They also exist at an international policy level, right? At a global level. There are power struggles that have been going on for millennia. And in general, I think really developmentally where most human beings are at is that we hit a point of, you know, wrestling with power as this is how life is. And we get stuck there and we get addicted to it because there are reward systems involved in power and dominance and the flexing of power and the, all of that. Dopamine gets involved, hormone signaling gets involved. It starts to hijack our bodies. And so in this discussion, I want to start to unpack my thoughts about, what this is in more detail, what actually costs us, what are we actually losing to stay addicted to power struggles collectively? And what are some other facets of the problem that maybe you've not considered before that have never been discussed before? Okay. So I want to offer you a thought here at the beginning of this conversation, which is attributed to Albert Einstein. I don't know if it actually is a quote from him. I guess evidently there's no documented proof he actually wrote or said this. But the quote goes, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used to create them." And I think if we start to think of this in terms of levels of development, this really starts to ring true. So we cannot find solutions to our problems at the same level of development that created them, right? So the power stage in developmental psychology is a stage of personal growth. It is a stage of psychological development. And it's also, a stage of collective developmental psychology, right? But I think your average human being confuses that for this is just how reality is. This is how human nature is. This is as far as we can go. Life has always been a power struggle, so it always needs to be a power struggle. And we end up in like this kind of infinite loop of retaliation and one-upsmanship and dominance and control and rebellion against control and then rebellion against the rebellion and co-opting power back and forth. And again, I see this everywhere. I see this, when I just see how people interact with each other online. I see this when I go out in public and I see how people relate to each other. I see this obviously at the level of like societal power or, the exchange of ideas or, discourse. I see this at the level of systems. I see this at the level of nations and at the level of international policy, like I said. So hopefully you see this too. Hopefully you're able to tune into this with me and you see what I see, which is that the real heart of where we're stuck is power and unhealthy misuse of power and the ensuing struggle that comes out of the misuse of power. Now, this obviously begs the question, does the use of power always have to require struggle? Right? And what would healthy, clean power without struggle look like? And what defines a power struggle? And I want to explore a little thought experiment with you here. So think along with me on this for a moment. One thing that's never discussed when we're talking about healthy use of power, right use of power, power dynamics, power issues in the world is something that we know, which is that in any sort of situation where there's power involved, right? Whether we're talking local power, whether we're talking just a small group of friends, or whether we're talking at the scale of nations, the likelihood that the people in power are some form of sociopath, narcissist, psychopath, or Machiavellian type is a high percentage, okay, much higher than your average population. So there are different estimates in terms of what that number is, but just consider that this is something we didn't know until fairly recently, but now we know for fact that a higher percentage of people in positions of power at any kind of level of power are likelier to be some form of cluster B, dark triad type personality. Not all, but many, many more. Okay? Let's just try that on as a notion because there have been studies to prove that. Now, if we think about this and then we think about human history and power structures in human history, consider that, and this is just a thought experiment here. I don't have proof. I can't, substantiate this, but consider that as far back as we can probably think, this has been our experience of power, that those who run things are some form of sociopath, psychopath, narcissist, or Machiavellian type. So, and just to contextualize that a little bit, these types of people, their behavior tends to cause harm and damage to the point of causing, quite frankly, trauma and PTSD in people who have close relationships with these types often, because their behavior is deceptive and manipulative and self-serving, right? So we have a propensity in human nature, let's say, for those in power to be self-serving and manipulative and to do so in a way that does not consider others and therefore is damaging to the social fabric, damaging to the collective psyche, damaging to a personal psyche, damaging, of course, in terms of outcomes and impacts in all kinds of different ways, wars or economic, realities or what have you. There are very real damages that come out of the actions taken by people who are deeply, deeply self-serving and what most of us would consider not mentally healthy or normal. Okay. Now, I don't want to overly stigmatize people with these disorders because they are disorders and, I want to be fair here. But consider that. So thought experiment here. What if throughout our entire history, we've never had a clean experience of power without these types of personalities being in the mix to kind of distort our experience of power? What if we are all kind of, what I'm saying here is collectively traumatized a bit and don't have a clear experience of what it means to be held in a structure, a power structure, a container that genuinely supports, sees, cares about us, and serves us? And then what if that wound also then gets kind of mapped over into more personal domains, right? So think about modeling clean power in family systems, right? Healthy parenting that, uses power wisely and judiciously, or healthy power in religious systems, education systems, right? So if we just look at those examples, and we could pull many more, financial systems, et cetera, policing. If we just look at those examples and we consider, that in all of these domains, perhaps we do not have clean power, healthy power modeled for us, it's no wonder that we all grow up then, and this would be intergenerational all the way back. No wonder that we all grow up then with like this connotation and this experience of power that is deeply impacted by pain, by fear, with a sense of tyranny involved in it, with a sense of toxicity, with a sense of me versus you, right? Because that is the the way that these personality types tend to roll. So let's just consider for a moment that part of the reason power struggles are an addiction and are a thing is because uh, we've never seen clean power modeled, or most of us haven't, and that we certainly haven't experienced that at a systemic level, and that it's always been this way. So we all have distorted filters around power. So with that being said, and again, that's just a thought experiment. I don't know that this is fact, but it kind of adds up to me. Uh, I wanted to just kind of like touch upon a little bit of the neurobiology of power and what we know about that. This is actually a deep, deep topic. And it's something that I would encourage you to kind of look up on your own too and learn more about. But power dynamics massively influence our neurobiology. So your neurochemistry, the way your brain wires up, your physiology, your hormone profile are all impacted by power dynamics, right? So there's something called the winner effect, for example, where when people are more successful, their neurobiology kind of kicks into a more bold way of functioning. So people who are, successful a lot, who things go well for them, they tend to have higher dopamine amounts, stronger dopamine, more motivation, more serotonin, more of a sense of well-being. They become more assertive, more self-assured, more confident, more direct. And the inverse is also true, that when people lose, right? So if someone fails at something or takes a loss, their neurochemistry reflects that, and it becomes harder to think, it becomes harder to feel confident, it becomes harder to feel happy, it becomes harder to get motivated, right? So your neurobiology is massively impacted by whether you're kind of succeeding or losing, or whether you are, thriving or not thriving. So it's kind of an upward or downward spiral effect that happens. Power also massively affects things like testosterone levels, right? So people who are in positions of power not only tend to, if they're male, have higher testosterone levels, they tend to generate more testosterone, higher spikes of testosterone through displays of power and experience of power, as far as I understand it. So all of this is to say that, if we have collectively a wounded, distorted experience of power, part of what we're probably trying to do in these power struggles that we engage in, and again, this could be as simple as arguing with someone online, or, getting into like some sort of back and forth with a family member or something. This doesn't have to be some big, grandiose thing. I see this all over the place. I think people are really addicted to it. One of the things that people are probably trying to achieve as they're wrestling for power is to correct their own neurochemistry by trying to get a bit of the winner effect, right? So there's this neurobiological implication, but let's talk a little bit about how to recognize power struggles. What does this actually look like practically? Okay. So in the Substack post, I listed a bunch of things, and we'll touch upon a few of those here. But I think the real key signature that you are in some sort of a power struggle, and that perhaps you're a bit addicted to it, is, let's say, an addiction to polarizing or polarity. I think this is the thing we see the most in the world right now. This is the most common thing, is people feel like they need to take polarized, oppositional stances against other people, and kind of around any topic. And it's almost to an absurd degree now. It almost doesn't matter what the topic is. There are going to be people who polarize and push against what other people have to say. And this becomes, again, at scale, a real problem, because now we have a bunch of people who are trying to get some sort of neurochemical reward, or engaging in kind of like neurochemical combat with each other as a culture, as a cultural way of navigating life together, right? As a way of engaging. And it just self-perpetuates. Again, the quote from Einstein earlier, that you cannot, solve a problem with the same thinking that we use to create it. if we're resonating at this level of power and we're not moving to a higher level of thinking to be able to understand that power and find solutions outside the box of power struggle, we end up, it's like the Hatfields and the McCoys. We end up in this back and forth, revenge for revenge for revenge for revenge. Who's going to get the last laugh kind of thing. As a model for navigating life and a model for thriving, it just doesn't work. Simple as that. So the first thing I would look at here, and I would encourage you to look at, is addiction to polarizing and polarity. Whether you see that in others or you see that in yourself, this is the first thing to track. There are a lot of other kind of relational things that I've kind of unpacked, and they're part of my whole secure self-relating modality that I've created and the course. So if you want to learn more about this, this is all built into that. But there are behaviors that are typical of power struggles. Two obvious ones would be judgment, dismissiveness. The super obvious one here is control, right? And let's be clear. I want to kind of make this explicit for a moment. Most of us, our connotation of power is being in control or being controlled. And I would offer you the idea that that's not the only way power has to be. That power can be shared. That instead of power over, we can have power with, and that we can have power in a way that's dynamic and negotiated and moves back and forth, rather than this I have the power, you don't, you have the power, I don't kind of thing that people get into. Let me see. So judgment, dismissiveness, control, obviously shaming, reputational attacks, trying to in-group, out-group somebody. These are all common forms of power struggle. So let's discuss a little bit here about some of the hidden issues in power struggles. If I haven't kind of sold you on why this is holding us back or the ugliness of this yet, let's get a little bit deeper into why this is actually a problem. Because, I could imagine a certain contingent of people saying, oh yeah, well, this is just human nature and this is just how it is and it's always been this way. And what's wrong with competing and controlling and winning and manipulating others? And that's just how we are. That contingent is out there. And so I want to offer you some answers to that question. So let's explore that. So let's talk a little bit about some of the hidden costs here that most people don't consider when they're kind of just impulsively engaging in some sort of a power dynamic with others, that I think are really important to illustrate, and so that we really know what we're doing when we choose to get into one of these power struggles, okay? So the first cost here is something that I don't see spoken about anywhere else. And, at first may not seem that significant, but I think is actually a pretty big deal. And that is that in order to be in a power struggle with someone or something, you have to be resonating with it at that level. So at that frequency or at that level of consciousness, you're kind of operating at that same level with it. So it kind of locks you into a certain level of functioning, which is not a very high level of functioning, let's be honest here. And in that, as you're kind of locked into this, you get enmeshed. So enmeshment is when we kind of lose our sense of boundaries and get entangled with someone else or something else, and we're kind of tangled up, and there's a blurring of who is me and who is you and what's mine and what's yours. And there's just this kind of like knot that gets kind of created back and forth of entanglement and blurring and overlap. So when you engage in a power struggle with someone, it locks you into this lower kind of level of consciousness, and you lose a sense of self, and you get kind of all tangled up into this thing. Again, with no end in sight, because it's just a back and forth over and over and over. Even if you win, theoretically, a power struggle, that other person's going to want revenge, or someone else is going to want revenge on their behalf, or whatnot. So the first thing it costs you is just real peace. because your nervous system is now tangled up, your sense of self is tangled up, where the lines are here become blurry and fuzzy, and it costs you a lot of peace and well-being and, quite frankly, freedom and comfort. So to resonate with people at that level is to get enmeshed. So I want you to think about that. But there's even more precious things that get lost when we're in power struggles here. So think this through with me. So from my perspective, there are certain aspects of life, of human experience, that are deeply, deeply precious. Chief among them would be our time. Because you can get more money or more whatever. You cannot get your time back. You only have so much time on this earth. So much time is you. And that time is therefore the most precious thing you have because it's super scarce. So when we are engaged in power struggles, again, that have no end, that theoretically can go on forever and ever, that hijack your peace, that enmesh you, that blur your sense of self, one of the major things it costs you is your time. You lose time to, thinking about these things, obsessing about these things, trying to figure these things out, struggling in the actual fighting of these things over and over. And along with that, another precious resource of ours, rather, that power struggles burn is our attention. If we're really in a power struggle, it's going to limbically hijack you. It's going to hijack your reptilian brain and your mammalian brain. You're not going to be able to think straight. You're going to be obsessive. You're going to be focused. You're going to be in fight or flight. And that means your attention's going to shrink and narrow to just the power struggle, which means that you lose out on all the other things that you could be putting your attention onto. You lose your attention bandwidth. You lose your scope. You lose the ability to focus on other things that maybe are more productive or that are balancing for you or that are constructive for you. And because of that, a third thing that I think is deeply precious that power struggles cost us is our well-being, right? You get drained, you get exhausted. Your sense of trust in life gets hurt, gets wounded, gets damaged, right? It's brutal, it's gnarly. So when we're in a power struggle, we get just blown out, exhausted. Your nervous system can only handle so much. And then, people just like overdo it and just, drain their system. And then they wonder why they feel like life sucks or why they're tired all the time or why they're unhappy all the time. Because you have no life force, you have no vitality, you have no well-being because you haven't nourished yourself because you've been busy in a power struggle. And along with that, we burn our potential. And again, also collectively, we lose our time, we lose our attention, right? How much of our collective attention is burned on power struggles rather than really problem solving our way out of the mess we find ourselves in? How much of our collective attention is hijacked, and therefore our collective well-being is not something that we're really building or accessing or enjoying because we're so busy being involved in power struggles. And, especially with potential, how much collective potential are we squandering? How many brilliant minds? How many breakthrough ideas or technologies? How many beautiful new experiences of life that could be possible just don't come into being, don't get created, don't get invented, or get squandered or squashed out because humanity is too busy in a power struggle to like bolster that stuff and support that stuff and bring it up and like create it. Another huge one, again, both personally and collectively, that is really actually deeply important for your nervous system health, for your mental health, for your emotional health, connection to community. when we are busy in power struggles, it wounds our desire to want to connect with others, especially if the power struggle is with certain parts of your community or with other communities that are contrasting to your community, etc. It damages, again, our drive and our trust in our fellow human beings and our willingness to connect to the broader scope of people and structures of people. And then, like I kind of said before, but just to come back around to this, like really power struggles damage our trust in life, right? This is a huge part of for example, tyrannical parenting that damages perhaps a child attachment system. That child is going to grow up to be an adult, most likely, who has some sort of belief uh, that's rooted in like a distrust in life. So it won't just be about I don't trust my parent. It will get generalized out to I don't trust people, or I don't trust life, or I don't trust myself, or I don't trust my own body, or I don't trust relationships. It'll spread. So it becomes not just a damage at the level of the relationship to the tyrant, but to all of life. So while we're busy arguing with other people on the internet, or shit talking people, or trying to get our political agenda above another political agenda, while we're in that kind of struggle, we are burning all these things. We're burning our time, our attention, our collective well-being, our collective potential, our connection and trust to our fellow human being, and ultimately our trust in life itself. All these things get damaged. And this is, quite frankly, how we end up failing as a species. Think about that. Like, if all that's wounded, how do we pull it together and sort out the problems that need sorting out? We don't. We just squabble and squander all that potential because we're too addicted, because we're too limbically hijacked. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what attachment healing has taught me about this, and what my work with secure self-relating and my work in trauma work with clients, what I've started to learn about all this. So just to provide a little bit of context here, I made a pivot a few years ago in my coaching work and in my hypnosis work and my psychedelic therapy work to an emphasis on attachment theory. Now, I'm not going to go deep into attachment theory here. If you're not familiar with it, I would encourage you to look it up, because attachment theory, in my experience and what I've been seeing and learning, is at the root of how our nervous system is organized. So our early attachment experiences and attachment experiences in general deeply impact our human nervous system. They just do, because we are fundamentally social animals. We're fundamentally wired for connection, and there's deep reward systems involved in that. There's deep health involved in that. When our attachment system, and by attachment, this is not in the Buddhist sense, this is in the Western, psychotherapy sense. When our attachment system is damaged, it impacts our mental health and our physical health and our nervous system health overall in a really deep and significant way. What I've been discovering through studying this and then applying this in the work that I do with people is that basically the principle is that how people treat each other massively impacts whether we feel strong, healthy, integrated, safe, comfortable, whole in our own skin, and mentally healthy and resilient and strong, or whether we feel dysregulated, stressed, anxious, depressed, lost, confused, suffering, and generally mentally unhealthy. So the way we relate to each other can heal or can traumatize. That's often how I put it to my clients. And I'm not, that's not hyperbolic to say. I'm not being extreme here by saying this. This is not a leap, even if it sounds like one. This is just how it is. Most of trauma is relational at the root. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And because of that, our relating matters significantly. Okay. Which means that, again, the way we're treated around power is part of that. So if we are treated in a way where our power is honored, but other people's power is also honored, and there's like a dynamic give and take of power, or a negotiating of power, or a sharing of power, or a timing and a rhythm to power, or clarity about who has power where and in what way, generally we tend to do really well and things tend to be very healthy. It's usually the denial of someone's power, the controlling of someone's power, the taking away of someone's power, the invalidation, the imbalance of power. These are the things that in relating will start to damage the attachment system. And again, healthy attachment system, strong mental health and sense of well-being and personal sovereignty equals person who's able to show up more and participate in life more, co-create more productive, more effective. At scale, that turns into teams of people who know how to work together and harmonize, which at scale creates more effective, productive teams, which at scale makes more things possible. When we have more dysfunctional relationships, people who are underfunctioning, who are anxious, depressed, stressed, weak, traumatized, distrustful of each other, suddenly there's way more noise in the whole system that massively impacts what's possible. And that's how we end up in these power struggles in the first place. Again, we probably have a legacy here of never having experience of clean power. And so this goes all the way back. This is relational in nature from my perspective. This is deeply personal. This is at the root of each of our nervous system, but it's also collective at the same time. And all of that is kind of, when I show clients secure self-relating and I show them the techniques and I start to frame all this with them and start to teach them how to heal their own attachment system, this is one of the things that is a huge epiphany for them, is how much they've been outsourcing their own power, or where they've been afraid of their own power, or where they've been afraid of power in general, or whether they've been afraid of other people's power, or, as that starts to get cleaned up, it's this massive revelation for what it means to own one's own power, to exist in power, and to use power in a clean and fair way, which is totally possible. So that's what this work has been showing me. And it's, if I can be honest with you, been profound just in my own life in terms of repatterning my relationship to power, to start to really integrate what this means to feel in touch with my own power, and to be able to honor other people's power, and to be able to do that in a collaborative frame. Again, power with instead of power over. And if you read 100 books on leadership, you're going to probably hear the same thing, which is that that's how good leadership is done. There's a way. It's kind of what I'm saying here. So let's wrap the video here. Let's summarize this a little bit here. Just go over some of the points just to remind you, and we'll call it good. So now you know from my perspective what I think is holding humanity back. The more I look at this and I really explore it from different angles, there are more specific things we could describe here in terms of, implementation of socioeconomic policy, or how we use tech, or blah, blah, blah. But the undergirding of all of that is relational and how we relate to each other. And inside of that general relational lens, it's in particular the way we're using power and obsessing over trying to co-control each other and struggle around power. Again, at every level, whether we're talking personal or collective, that's where we're getting stuck as a species, from my point of view, in terms of what we could be growing into. Okay. Now, I just want to remind you again, the bottleneck of evolution is power struggle. We've never seen clean power modeled because we've always had some form of narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths, Machiavellians in the mix, controlling power and therefore coloring our experience of it. In order to recognize power struggles, there are a lot of things you could look for, but the fundamental one is really an addiction to polarization. That is, power lives in polarity. So that's how you recognize it. Some of the real costs that it costs us to engage and be addicted to these power struggles is it costs us peace in the form of we become enmeshed. And it also costs us things like our time, our attention, our well-being, our trust in life. And those are some of the most precious things we have. Those are things we should be protecting at all costs. Again, at the personal and the collective level, because when we have a society of people who have, trust in life and have time and have attentional bandwidth, those are people who are going to thrive and be more functional, right? And what I've started to learn from all of this is that this is immediately apparent when you start doing attachment healing work, when you start to do trauma healing work, that this is here in every person's wounding. So this is both deeply personal and deeply collective. Goes all the way back to early nervous system imprints, but it's also about how we're treated every single day. It's also about how we internalize a self-relationship and treat ourselves. And if we want to really, crack things open in the best sense of that phrase and actualize whatever potential we have as a species and really create an incredible, thriving future, we've got to really rethink and reapproach our relationship to power entirely, and learn how to, again, grow to a different level of thinking than power struggling as the solution. So that's it for now. Before we go, I want to just kind of put out there a couple quick requests from you, a couple calls to action here. So first of all, what do you think about this? If you've watched this whole video, and I realize it's long, do you agree? Do you disagree? Did you have any aha moments? Are you calling bullshit on something I've said here? Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. I'd really appreciate that. Also, if you like this kind of content, if you found this thought provocative or resonant with where you're at or helpful, do the thing. You know what to do here on YouTube, but also consider checking out my links below. I've got a Substack. I've got a TikTok. If you are interested in learning how to heal your own trauma, I've got a course that I've created for that. That's also in my links. So you can check all that out if you're interested. And I would just love to hear from you. I'd love to know who you are and what hit home for you. So yeah, leave a comment, engage, and let's build this conversation. I'll see you guys in the next one.